This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone. You can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to pretty much everything. Social media, my columns at it used to be The Independent. Now it's 6035 Media. Also, my photography website, all that other kind of stuff. And you can also send me an email. We get suggestions all the time. We love hearing from our listeners and getting suggestions and comments and things like that. We love hearing from you. If you have a suggestion for a guest we can have on the podcast, we would definitely like to hear that, because I know every once in a while you probably get tired of hearing me rattling on. And boy, the one podcast you don't want to hear is one I do by myself. So it's good having Kevin here and having guests on the podcast every once in a while. You can also become a supporter of the podcast with Patreon. I'm going to have some really exciting news coming up later in the podcast about Patreon. So all that stuff is available at my website, hikingbob.com. And as you heard today, joining me is my co-host, Kevin Wild Westendorf.
Hey everyone, it's Kevin Wild Westendorf here, and you can find me on social media at Wild Westendorf on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and also my website, which is www.wildwestendorf.com.
Just don't tell me you have an OnlyFans page.
No. I thought about it, but I think that's against the law to be on the trails naked. So yeah.
Please don't do that. As you can tell, Kevin's joining me by Zoom today, so it might sound just a little different, but we're on Zoom today, so ready to go. Kevin, one of the things I'm excited to talk about is that after a couple weeks hiatus, my newspaper column is back online at, like I mentioned earlier, 6035 Media. We took a couple weeks off while they were transitioning from the Independent and the Business Journal and all those other newspapers into one, and also the name change and it switched to a nonprofit and all that kind of stuff. But the good news is my column is back. The first one went live for the new year, went live last week. So that's back. So I'm real happy to have my column back in there. We'll hopefully be providing a lot of the usual. I would like to think that me providing good information there is not something unusual. So all that stuff is going to be back there. So I'm really, really super happy to be back on the back at the. I'm going to call it the Independent for a long time. It's going to be hard to break that havoc. But in any case, column is back, I guess the best way to put it. Kevin, how have you been doing? You been out hiking or anything? Hiking lately has been nothing but a big muddy mess.
Yeah, I went out to Oil Well Flats on Saturday, and it was mostly dry, but there were a lot of parts that were very, very muddy because we've actually have gotten a winter so far.
Yeah.
So I purposely chose that area because I knew it'd be most exposed to the sun, which would mean less snow and such, which was true. But yeah, there were certain parts that were very, very muddy, and it was still a great time though.
Yeah, this is that time of the year that things can just be a big mess. I did a video when I was out in Cheyenne Mountain State Park doing a day as a trail ambassador out there, and the trails were just a mess. So I did a short, I don't know, I think it's maybe 2-minute video on the etiquette of hiking in muddy trails. And basically the etiquette is try to avoid hiking on muddy trails if you can. But it's possible that you may go out and run into a muddy section a mile in or 2 miles in, and maybe you don't want to turn around, or maybe it's longer to go back than to keep going. So of course, we'll just go over that here real briefly. The etiquette is if you run into a muddy section of the trail, stay in the muddy section of the trail. Do not go around it, because then you wear down the edges of the trail, you kill the vegetation, some of which takes a very long time to recover. And if you don't want to get muddy, then this is the time of year then you don't go hiking, or you stay on snowy trails, or you stay on paved trails. When this podcast comes out, we're going to be having some pretty cold weather here in Colorado, the Pikes Peak region. And actually, that's kind of good if the trail's been muddy, because then all that mud freezes, and you can actually walk on it without getting muddy. And if we get snow and then you get a couple inches of snow, that's fine too. But you just don't want to see people going around trails and making things a lot worse that somebody's got to go fix. later on. So try to avoid muddy trails altogether. Wear boots you don't mind if they're going to get to be a muddy mess. The boots I've been wearing when I expect mud have been boots that are kind of on their last legs and are probably, by spring will be gone. They're pretty worn out. So I don't care if I get them muddy. And then of course when you get them home, clean them. You can hose them off or brush them off, and do not throw them in the washing machine. That's definitely not good for boots. Yeah, but I've got a boot dryer here. That's perfect. I hose them off, wash them, brush them, and then put them on the boot dryer, which dries them with just convected air, not even blowing hot air into them.
Well, that's
One secret I've used before I got that, if you have forced air heat and you have a floor vent, turn the boots upside down on the floor vent so air blows up into them. They say blowing air into them isn't the best thing, but it's better than trying to throw them in a dryer or something like that. And that keeps your boots nice and dry. And this is definitely when you want, waterproof boots like Gore-Tex or something like that. Do you have a pair of those, Kevin? Do you use waterproof boots?
yes, but I have earned my current pair, which I think I might have mentioned this last week. But my current pair, there's definitely in my right shoe, there's definitely a little bit of a break in the seal because I've definitely learned that in the snow, like it just gets flooded with cold and water, which just is around the time of the year every year where I get a new pair of boots anyway. And as we discussed on the show before, the Pikes Peak gravel puts a number on the boots, so they tend to wear out a lot faster than if we were to hike in other parts of the states. So yeah, my shoes tend to last about a year, and then I transfer my retired boots to my work boots, which work fine, and still like there's still a bunch of comfort and stuff. It just there's a little bit of wear and tear and damage on them that are great for work, but not great for the trails anymore. So within the next week or two, I'm gonna make a little stop to REI or Shields or online to my next pair of boots.
Yeah, so one thing about those boots that are waterproof, and I'm doing that in quotes, with a membrane like Gore-Tex or something, they do wear down just like your boots do. And eventually they will not be resistant to water anymore. Obviously, the only way to be completely waterproof is to have them where they're a sealant put on them or something like that. And that's one way to do it, really waterproof boots, or you buy boots that are, like a rubber upper and stuff like that. But the bad part about those, they don't breathe. So that
Yeah.
if you get your foot sweaty and then you stop and your feet get cold, that becomes an issue. It just depends. This time of the year, though, definitely want waterproof boots to keep your feet warm. Even though our snow is dry, so to speak, that we get here, it's still snow. It's still water based. It's still going to soak in. So definitely want to wear waterproof boots. But we're dealing with mud. The good part is we're getting snow, so we're getting mud. That's the bad part of it, but we're getting snow and we're actually having a winter like we haven't seen in a couple of years, which is a good thing. And we're seeing plenty of moisture in this part of the country. And I know about the time this podcast goes live, we'll be getting some more snow in the mountains. I'm trying to find out where I've got a day or two that I can just take off up into the mountains with my snowshoes. I imagine there's going to be some great
Oh,
snowshoeing going on up there right now, but I just haven't been able to break away with all kinds of other things going on, which I know is a shock to anybody who knows what's going on. Are you going to take any time off and try to get up into the mountains or anything, or are you just going to be busy working?
for now, I'm gonna be stuck at work, which I'm fine with. Always works out to where when we get our snowy days is when I'm at work. And then by the time the weekend comes, like, well, it's all melted, it's muddy. I can't really use these snowshoes because the pair that I've got are the ones I bought from you like a few years back,
Right, yeah.
and they're great. I just don't get to use them enough, and it's frustrating.
Well, in the last couple of years, to be honest, last couple of years here, unless you wanted to go way up into the mountains, that's a couple-hour drive from here. There really wasn't many places to go snowshoeing. Even close by at Mueller State Park, it was tough finding a good day there to do any snowshoeing. So we're obviously seeing much more snow. A couple of days ago, Cole and I went to 11 Mile State Park, which is probably one of the
Okay.
more remote state parks way out there. A good hour plus drive to get there. The lake is completely frozen over. I took some pictures that look pretty cool. But it was interesting, the trails, even there, and that's at 8,600 feet. So it's a couple thousand feet higher than we are here. It's one of those high altitude lakes. The trails were dry. And by dry, I mean there was not much snow anywhere, but there was also no mud, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm not sure how that happened, but we encountered more dry trails than we did snowy trails, and we encountered no mud at all, which made for a nice day to be out there. I went out there anticipating he and I were going to get, come back looking like we were rolling in the mud, but came back pretty dry. But I was surprised at how little snow was up there. And it was a warm day. It was, even up there, it was still in the mid 40s. So that's why I was really expecting mud, but got nothing. So just kind of weird. In any case, if you're out there hiking and you encounter a muddy trail, like I said, try to avoid it. Go around. Don't go around. Go back if you can. But if you can't, go right through it. If you don't like being muddy, if you don't like getting your clothes dirty, then this is a time of year to consider places that are in the sun a lot and stuff dries up, or go to Florida, or go to or stick with paved trails or something like that. If you go out now, you're going to get muddy, and try to avoid the muddy trails altogether. Today, the day we're recording this, I was back at Cheyenne Mountain State Park. Mud in some places. It was either mud or it was ice. And a week ago, when I was out there doing a Trail Ambassador Day, that one day I recorded that video, it was mud for miles. And I was out there because, part of being a trail ambassador is check on trail conditions and stuff like that. But it was just mud. But I was about 6 inches taller because all the mud sticking to the bottom of my boots. That was kind of nice, but just
when you hike at 11 Mile, what trails do you hike? Because I know there's a canyon there too.
No, there's 11 Mile Canyon and there's 11 Mile State Park.
Okay.
Two separate places. So 11 Mile Canyon is on the east side of the dam that makes up the reservoir, which is 11 Mile State Park. So there's two different places. So in 11 Mile Canyon, there's really not many trails. There's just a couple of short little trails. And you get into that from Lake George. You go south out of Lake George, it's a short distance, and you go in the 11 Mile. That's run by the U.S. Forest Service. 11 Mile State Park, this is interesting, is 11 miles from Lake George. So you go past Lake George, there's a turnoff at the fire station, and it's 11 miles to get to Lake George. I'm sorry, to get to 11 Mile from the town of Lake George. So that's the reservoir, and they only have trails in that one section. I wrote a column about it, and if I remember, I'll put a link in the show notes. They have trails on the north side of the reservoir in the eastern corner of the park, if that makes sense. The rest of it is campgrounds, and the lake is mostly for fishing and stuff like that. But there's some pretty nice trails there, and we still did 4.5-ish miles to this nice big loop.
Oh, okay, cool.
And I've gone there in August in the summer and shot some really great Milky Way pictures from there, and it's a pretty cool place. But it's so high up there that we go out there in August and still bring a sweatshirt, and you're going to be a little chilly out there. It's pretty cool. Nice place, very remote. Like I said, a long drive to get to it. Cell phone service actually is not bad there now. It used to be that they were completely out of touch with society back there, but we actually had pretty decent cell phone service through most of it if you head out there. So pretty cool place. But yeah, 11 Mile Canyon is on the east side of the dam. You can drive all the way to the dam at 11 Mile, but there's no way around it on any trails to get into the state park side.
Okay.
And the road going in there's 3 roads that go into the state park. All of them are terrible. The one from Lake George is the least terrible. The other ones are just terrible and even more terrible. There was, and I'm going to go off tangent here, but there was a T-shirt or a card or some meme that was out a while back, and it applied somewhere else, but they applied it to here. It was like, you could tell the drunk drivers, because they were the ones that kept driving through the potholes, the sober ones who were weaving around trying to avoid the potholes. That's kind of what it was like yesterday driving around, because I went through the state park at one point, just to the other side and out of the state park on the west side. That road is so bad, and there were potholes that I think the Jeep would have disappeared in. So I'm weaving around, and I'm sure if some state trooper saw me. Actually, if a state trooper saw me, I probably would have been okay. He goes, "Oh, he's just dodging the potholes." The guy driving straight through him is the one who's going to stop. So yeah, so that's 11 Mile Reservoir is really nice and a neat place. It's a pretty cool place to be. The sky's out there at night in the summer just to die for. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. But you got to want it. Like I said, it's way out there.
Yeah, because I've only camped out there, but I've never hiked out there. So,
You've camped in the state park side?
oh yeah, and
Oh, cool.
it's beautiful. It's great, except it was super windy during the daytime, so it
Yeah.
was kind of miserable. And I'm talking, it was like gale force winds the entire time. But
Oh,
once the sun set, it calmed down a lot and it was much, much better. So it's like, okay, we can actually have a campfire. And this is not the park's fault, but we did have neighbors who had a generator on until they had to turn it off until the quiet hours, which was 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And that was very annoying. And we had a few drinks and stuff. So once the generator was turned off, we all cheered like very loudly. And so they had some unkind words to say to us. And the next day, we're all leaving. It's a Sunday. And my friends actually ran into them at King Supers.
what's the chances of that? There's not a King Super for like 60 miles from there.
Yeah, it was. And they said it was extremely awkward because they came up to my friends and said, "Hey, weren't you our neighbors at 11 Mile?" And they're like, "Yes."
The right answer was nope, my twin brother.
So just kind of like it was very awkward tension there. So, but yeah, it was so funny though.
I wonder if they had an old generator because new generators now are so quiet you can hardly hear
Really
them.
loud.
Really?
It was obnoxiously loud. It's not like oh, it's a background noise or whatever. It just and they weren't even that close to us, but it was so loud, and we saw them just being in their trailer watching TV and stuff, which was kind of like why do you have this loud machine just to watch a TV show? Like it
Yeah.
was weird. Yeah.
Yeah, was a run with an old Chevy small block V8 or what?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen, new generators, and I'm not talking about like brand new, but generators in the last couple of years, the few I've seen, because we don't use them, we always go where we can just plug in, are pretty quiet. I mean, they don't make a tremendous amount of noise. And you put like a 15-foot extension cord and put it away from your camper a little bit, and you barely even hear it. So it's interesting that that they're that noisy. But in any case, I think it's a cool park. It's a really cool place.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
better if you like. There's no swimming allowed there. You're not allowed in the water. There's no motorized boats allowed in there, but you can do kayaking. They do stand-up paddle boarding in there.
Which is what we did. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in South Park, so it's wide open, which is why you had a lot of wind. It's in that high plain there, so it's really wide open, so you get a lot of wind. But the views there, and at night, man, I've seen some really great sunsets there when I've taken pictures. So, pretty cool place.
At night, me and one of my friends were just having a moment, just being like, the stars are just so bright tonight. Like it's so vivid, and yeah, it's gorgeous out there at night.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot. So, anyway, so that's the scoop there with winter and hiking and if you've bought snowshoes and you've been sitting on them for a couple years, this might be the year you actually get to use them. It should be kind of cool. But you still might have to drive a little bit. We're seeing snow, but you need 6, 7, 8 inches of snow to really be effective for snowshoe. We're not quite seeing that here, but you don't have to go very far to see it. Kevin, an update from our friends at Fisher's Peak State Park. And back in December, I had Crystal Drayling, the park manager, on here giving us an update on the trails. You and I went out there and hiked the trails, and the one trail we didn't do, I went back and hiked it. So while we were there, we noticed that there was one trail called the Lower Lone Cub Trail. That was one of the trails they allow cycling, but the way it was designed, you can only go uphill on that trail. And then you can go, it was two-way traffic on the Upper Lone Cub, and then you came back and you had to go down one called Poison Canyon. They just announced that they made Lower Lone Cub bi-directional also, so you can go up and down it. I guess Poison Canyon, from what I've heard, was a little difficult for some people, and it was really the only way to get back down. You had to go down that trail. So they've changed that because the Challenge Trail is not for bikes at all. And you and I have been on that, and there's a reason why it's not for bikes, because it's straight down or straight up. And then the other trail on the other side, which is also not for bikes at all, that's the Goldenrod Trail. That's hiking only. So they've announced that the Lower Lone Cub Trail is now both ways for bikes. So if you're a cyclist and you want to go out there, you might want to wait till spring or summer. But in any case, you want to go out there, that trail is now bi-directional for bikes. So it's going to make it a little easier for cyclists. We saw cyclists out there the day you and I were out there, stopped and talked to them, a couple of people. They love it. It's a lot of elevation gain, but it's done well. It's not so steep that you can't get up there. We saw people, they told us they were not big time cyclists, but they really didn't have a lot of trouble going up that trail. So that's an update from that. They've put a new map on Facebook. I'm trying to get a copy of that in a PDF, and I'll get that out to in my column and stuff like that as soon as I can get my hands on that. It's still not updated on CoTrex, the Colorado Trail Explorer website and app, but I imagine now that they've got a map and a PDF and everything that they will probably get that updated pretty soon. Kevin, I want to go back down that way, not so much to do the trails until they open the one to the summit, because we've now touched every trail. And I should mention too, the Poison Canyon Trail, that's bike only downhill, is only bikes too. There's no hikers allowed on that. But there's some pretty cool trails across the highway at Trinidad Lake State Park that you can actually see that from there, that I want to go down there and do. This is like a 12-mile hike you can do going out and back. On a trail that runs around there, and it's 12 miles, but it's not a hard 12 miles. So it'd be a nice day to go out and really make up some miles.
If you go, please give me a heads up if you want a little bit of company, because I haven't been to that state park yet. But I saw it from Fisher's Peak State Park, and it looks gorgeous out there.
That's a reservoir. And the reservoir is owned by the Army Corps of Engineers, but the Colorado Parks and Wildlife runs the park that's around it. So it's pretty cool setup down there. So anyway, that's the great news from Fisher's Peak. Last I heard, they're still pushing to open their trail to the top of the mountain sometime next year, which everybody's pretty excited about. I think that should be pretty cool. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be like August before we'll be able to get to the summit. Last I heard, they're pushing through. So good news on that.
Yeah, because it's going to be a long trail. And I remember when we were there, estimate that you probably 12 miles round trip or something like that.
Actually, I'm leaning more towards about 18. The Dixon Trail here at Cheyenne Mountain State Park, if you go up there and do the loops, it's around 14 miles round trip.
Yeah.
And Fisher Peak is going to be a longer hike. What the park manager down there told me, she's guessing still because they're building it, but probably going to be like an 18-mile round trip. And it's going to be like at Cheyenne Mountain. You're going to have to do it in a day because there's no backcountry camping or anything. There's not going to have any campsites. So you have to go up and get it done in a day. That's going to be a very long day, not including the 2 hours just to drive down there.
Well, you know me, I'm all for that. So
yeah, I can't wait. I'm dying to do it. I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So hopefully in about a year, well, later this year, we'll be telling everybody listening to this podcast what it's like to hike up to the top of Fisher's Peak. Yep. I think it's going to be, and the views up there, I'm just thinking are going to be incredible.
Yeah, because you'll have the Trinidad Lake State Park. You can see everything out east. You can see the Spanish Peaks. It's going to be amazing.
Yep, it should be a whole lot of fun. So fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. I have no doubt that the willpower is there to get it done. I guess it's always like anything else, how much Mother Nature cooperates with the people out there building the trail. But they've done great work in a short period of time out there. So I think it's going to keep going. Kevin, another topic you and I have talked about in the past was about privately owned land, especially mountains, 14,000-foot peaks being closed because the private landowners and, people said, people shouldn't be able to own a mountain. Well, whatever. They got the mountain legally. It's theirs to do whatever they want with it. I don't know why people think they should be so entitled to recreate on a place that's privately owned. But in the past, some property owners on these mountain peaks would let people go hike up there. And then they stopped doing that because there's a lawsuit right here in Colorado Springs at the Air Force Academy where a cyclist hit a pothole in a trail and got really seriously hurt. Ended up suing the Air Force, the U.S. government, and won a rather sizable decision. Because he got sued, because he was successful in that suit, and lawyers got involved, lawyers were telling the property owners, this could happen to you. You could get sued if somebody gets hurt climbing on your mountain. You probably want to shut down your mountain. That shut down a lot of peaks. Now we're slowly getting some open. The details are kind of silly. I shouldn't say silly. what people miss in the details was that the Air Force Academy lost the lawsuit because they had, by the time this accident occurred, quite a bit of notice that this pothole was there. And they didn't do anything. They didn't go fix it. They didn't put a sign up. They didn't put cones around it. They didn't do anything. So what got them in trouble was not that somebody got hurt on their trail, was that they had a lot of notice that this trail had a defect, didn't do anything about it when they had enough notice, and somebody got hurt. So I think a lot of the concern of a lot of the property owners on these peaks is not really anything they need to be concerned about. I mean, if you act and if you act and you go to fix it, once you get notice of it, you should be fine. There's a lot of nuances to it. And of course, I am not a lawyer. I don't give legal advice. To me, it was kind of stretching things a little bit. But whatever the reason, property owners decided they didn't want to allow people up there. It's their right to do it, although it is disappointing. And I would rather see they allow people up there. It's their right to do it. Part of the issue boiled down to there is a law in Colorado that, for example, it's an outdoor recreation liability law that keeps, for example, ski resorts from being sued. If you go skiing and you run into a tree, that's your fault. It is not your fault. You can't sue the ski resort. If you go to a Rockies game in Denver and you get hit by a foul ball, you can't sue the Rockies because that's an inherent danger of being in a ballpark. Of course, now Major League Baseball put nets up, blah, blah, blah. Still, those laws exist. The law, however, does not extend to private property owners that allow people to climb on their mountains, go hiking, and that kind of stuff. So they're not included in this law because I guess when they wrote it, they just never thought of that. It wasn't a thing. Nobody thought of it. There is finally some movement going on with a state senator out of Woodland Park, just up the road from here a little bit, that is looking to do some legislation that's going to add property owners on mountains and any property owner that allows hiking, basically. If he allows hiking, he or she, the property owner allows hiking, then they will be free of liability if something happens to somebody there. Now, of course, if you go hiking someplace you're not supposed to go, you go trespassing, pretty much that property owner has a defense because you're not supposed to be there anyway. You're committing a crime. If in the course of committing a crime you get hurt, well, you're an idiot because you're committing a crime. You're being on place illegally. But nonetheless, there seems to be some movement going on with that. And I think anybody here in Colorado who recreates is probably kind of relieved to hear that they may open up some more mountains that are not open up. They may open up more land that connects places that, have been closed because of liability concerns. And, while we can try to make things as safe as they can, eventually it just becomes incumbent on all of us to be responsible for ourselves and to take responsibility. When you're out there hiking at 10, 12, 13, 14,000 feet, you have to recognize that it's probably a little dangerous there and you probably should be careful. And if something happens to you, well, I hope you have good insurance to take care of things and hope you have your affairs in order in case things really get bad. But, it's not necessarily not everything has to be somebody else's fault, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think this law or proposed law is great because I can't imagine I ever would, but if I somehow came into owning a bunch of land, that would be a lot of fun to hike on. I would love to welcome that. I'd be like, hey, everyone can come on and hike through it, like build a few trails and stuff, it'd be great. But I wouldn't want to have that worry and burden of, if someone gets hurt at 12,000 feet, I'm responsible for it. I understand the Air Force thing because that was very accessible land. It wasn't at 13,000 feet. It wasn't, it's going to take an all day thing just to put a sign up there, blah, blah, blah. Like it was very, very preventable, I think.
And that was the part I forgot to mention. This is the Air Force Academy. It's right here, just outside of town. It's not way up in a mountain someplace.
Yeah.
They probably could have driven a golf cart out there with some stuff and filled in that hole or put up a sign or a cone or something like that. But didn't mean to interrupt you. But I forgot to mention it was really accessible, so they had no excuse for not getting up to it.
Yeah. And I've been on those trails in the past, and I know, it can just be a golf cart, which I know the Air Force has. But I wouldn't expect a single landowner who owns 1,000 acres that happens to be up on a mountain to be able to drive a golf cart every day up the trail to see if there's any potholes and such. Like it's different when it's a government versus a landowner. I think it would be great to pass this because I'm sure a lot of people want their land to be open to hiking and biking and all that because they probably share that same love of the outdoors also, but just don't want to deal with a possibility of one person getting hurt and then getting sued, and then they lose their livelihoods, their home, their property, their money, blah, blah, blah. Like, I really hope this gets passed. It sounds like it's going to be a pretty simple, small law to pass, too. So I can't imagine it would take a ton of legislative effort to work with it, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like they have some pretty good support, bipartisan support. I'm going to try and get a hold of the senator who's doing this, see if I can get him a comment from him, or if I can't even get him on the podcast, would be awesome, and just talk to him a little bit more about it. But it sounds like a positive move, and there are property owners that said they would love to let people on their land, but they're worried about getting sued. And here's the thing: even if you win the lawsuit, you spend a whole lot of time and an insane amount of your money to defend yourself. So even if you think the lawsuit is not going to go anywhere, it still costs you a whole boatload of money. So I get it. I think it's a little, I don't think it's as bad as people think it is, but again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not one of these property owners. I don't have anything at stake, so I can sit here and give my opinion all day. But they're the people who are worried about it, and I don't blame them for being worried. But hopefully this legislation passes and becomes a reality. I think things are primed for that. When we saw places getting closed over the last couple of years, that brought it more forward. And I think that's going to change things. So fingers crossed, we may have good news in the next legislative session here in the state. And shall I say that I'm cautiously optimistic? I was going to say caustically. People say I'm already caustic enough, but cautiously optimistic that that's going to happen. And we'll see what happens there.
I'm
Go
curious
ahead.
to see what other Rocky Mountain states are doing about this. I haven't looked into it because I'm assuming they're facing the same stuff too. Montana, Idaho, New Mexico, Wyoming. So I'm curious to see like if there's a precedent set. So the lawmaker here can just say, "Hey, look at Montana" and stuff. I'm curious to see what other states have done about this.
It's a good point. And I'll, if I can get a hold of the senator, I'll check in on it and see if I can get an answer to that question. But that is a good question. Let's see. Last time I was on here, I talked about the TOPS ballot. I was going to speak in front of City Council. We did go to City Council. Boy, I was there all day. Spent all day at City Hall waiting for them to get their agenda item. The good news is that, except for one person, everybody spoke in favor of it. Some people had questions. That's okay. Questions are good. But City Council unanimously approved putting the TOPS, which is our trails, open space, and parks, 1 cent on every $10 tax, on the ballot in April. But they have to vote on it again because the law requires that everything have 2 public readings. I refer to them as hearings in my column. They're not quite hearings, but 2 public readings. So there'll be another one next week. That'll be the final one. Nothing's going to change. The legal people have gone over it, made sure all the wording was legal, so it can actually be put on the ballot. And I anticipate that that's going to go up there. But I spoke, representative from the Parks Advisory Board spoke, community members spoke. I think we're ready to go. So we'll be voting on that in April, extending it for 20 more years. We're not going to raise it. Still going to be 1 cent on every $10. We're kind of guaranteeing some money gets put aside for acquisition of land only. That's okay. We've been spending more than that anyway to buy land, so that's fine. We revealed prior to that the program is looking at 1,000+ acre parcel of land on the east side of town. That's going to be it's going to be bounded on one side by a very big development and a possibility of one coming on the west side. I'm sorry, on the east side. West side's got a development already in the works. East side might have one. So it's going to be 1,000-acre piece of greenway that's going to be preserved in there. So it's going to provide some really nice buffer space. And I think that sale is going to go through. We're getting a pretty good price on it. So I think that sale is going to go through, and that purchase, we're going to buy it, is going to go through, and we're going to be in pretty good shape there. So these are the things the TOPS program does. And I just pointed, for those who live out here, Red Rock Canyon open space, before the city acquired that as one of the TOPS properties that was purchased, that was due to become a 27-hole golf course, hundreds of condominiums, shopping, and all that kind of stuff. Instead, now it's this beautiful, probably one of the most popular recreation places in the southern half of the state. And you can't go by there on a weekend and not see the place just full with people in there. And it's huge, and it's just a beautiful spot. So that's the kind of things this fund has done. So it's pretty cool. But in any case, that looks like it's going to go forward, and we all should be happy that that's what's going to happen there.
And I'm a huge fan of Tusk.
Tops.
Or Tops, yes. A lot of people don't realize how invaluable it is. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of the suburbs. I grew up in the suburbs. I don't blame anyone or think anyone is bad living in them, but I grew up in it. I got bored of it. And so I prefer to live over on the west side of town, but I know how important it is to have that open space and those parks. And if you're going to live in the suburbs, I think it's extremely important to have that place to go and just go for an afternoon hike or walk, or like a place that just isn't filled with homes or strip malls, just an open land of nature. And even if it's on the east side of town where it's going to be mostly flat, like it's not going to have all the red rocks and stuff, like over on the west side, I think that those places are so important too. And I'm really, really, really excited to see Tops like actually continue towards that stuff and invest in those areas to open those lands, because I think us Westsiders have it lucky and easy too. We have Red Rock Open Space, we have Bear Creek, we have Sonderman Park, we have Garden of the Gods. And I think the east side needs to have more spaces open for recreation, for bike riding, for hiking, for walking. I just think it's so important. So I really, 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 really hope this measure passes so we can continue this for the next 20 years. While I'm sure it would make a few developers a ton of money, I am so glad that Red Rock Canyon Open Space was never turned into a community of homes and shopping and a golf course, because I think the value between a few people making a ton of money versus thousands and thousands and thousands, like tens of thousands of people having a place to recreate is so much more important than a few people making a bunch of money. So
one of the comments I made when I was speaking to council was that I lived here for 31 years. The more than that, the program has been in effect for 25 years, and my comment was that with the way the city's expanded in the time that I've been here, if this fund wasn't there to buy open space when it was available, and we don't take it, it has to be at fair market value and all those things, that we could have had what I refer to as a concrete jungle from here all the way out to the east, where there was no open space, nothing preserved. It was just like everything got paved over and houses put on it. And, people need houses and businesses need to be there, but we need to also take care of things that we get land when we can get it, that allows us to put in an open space and a trail and maybe a park and
the balance.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the reasons why people come out here to live here is because they like our parks and open spaces and they're near the mountains. This is why people come here. So we need to keep that going. So anyway, we're pretty excited about that, and, see what happens next. But I will tell you right now, vote yes. I don't even know what ballot number it's going to be called. I guess that's the next thing they do. We don't know if it's going to be 1 something or 2 something or Z something or whatever. That'll probably come up at the next council meeting when the city clerk assigns it a ballot position. But in any case, pretty excited about that. Kevin, I mentioned early on that we hear a lot from our followers and listeners and things like that. And, I got some messages the other day from one of our listeners. Their thing was that they think I should take you on some of the trips I go on. And I said, well, I would love to do that, but they're damned expensive. And I can't afford to do it, and you can't afford to do it. In case the
listeners don't remember or know, I work at a nonprofit. So I make a good living, but it's not enough to, I'm going to go on a trip for a week in Canada. Or what was the one you went on last year to the island?
I went to the Channel Islands.
Yeah.
And I've done the Galapagos and places like that.
Yep.
Yeah, and trust me, they take me a year or 2 years to save up enough money to go on these trips. So while I would love to have you go along with me, Kevin, I can't do it. I really appreciate the comment. They said, "Boy, it would be fun to have Kevin go with you." I'm going, "Yeah, it would be. I just can't afford to do it, and you would need to be able to take a lot of time off to do it. It would be wonderful to do that." So in any case,
yeah.
unless I could find, by the way, hint, hint, if you're a company out there and you want to become a sponsor of the show and maybe sponsor Kevin going with me on one of these things, then would be happy to do that. So, it seems like we can make that happen. The other thing was, and I got another, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I do have a PayPal, so if you want to help with that, then be great.
Maybe this is where you'll need to do it on OnlyFans page so you can pay for it. Maybe not. Not all my ideas are good ones, and that's probably one that's not a good one.
I would do more damage in the world if I had an OnlyFans. So.
Let's not do that. The other thing I heard from this listener, and I've heard from other listeners too, was about our Patreon, because we have Patreon where people can contribute and they get rewards based on their level of contribution. And I'm so happy to have you as a Patreon supporter. And before anybody says I didn't make Kevin do that so he could be on the podcast, he chose to do that on his own. I do appreciate it. One of the things I've heard from a couple of people was different levels of things. So right now we have like a $5 level, a $10 level, $15 level. We have different levels that people can contribute to Patreon. People said, can you open up any more options? So we now have 2 more Patreon options, a $2 level and a $3 level. I wanted to go even down to $1, but Patreon says, are you out of your mind? By the time we take the fees out, you don't get anything out of it. So it would just be an exercise in people putting money in and not making it to this podcast, which is obviously the point of it, is to support the podcast. But in any case, there are now $2 and $3 levels in addition to the other levels that people can contribute to support this podcast. Now, obviously at those levels, the reward you're going to get is me sending you an email every month that you contribute, thanking you for your support. And we do always appreciate that. But some of the more concrete, more physical rewards obviously are at higher levels. But if you want to contribute and you want to just be a part of it, we would greatly appreciate it. We have now opened up a couple more options. If you go to Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob, everything is right there. You just sign up. Everything happens right there. And we would really, really appreciate it. Thank you to the listeners who are emailing us. We have a couple other suggestions that I don't want to talk about them just yet because I'm not sure I can make them happen. But they're really good suggestions on what we can do on the podcast. And definitely, if you have somebody you'd like to hear as a guest on the podcast, would love to hear that too. And I'm working on a couple of different things right now, but we're still always want to hear if you know somebody, either somebody involved in outdoor recreation, a book author, something like that. So anyway, Kevin, we have some more options, so more people can contribute. Definitely people on a tight budget, and I get that. Everything's tight and expenses are going up, but this allows people a little more leeway to contribute and help us out here. So looking forward to that. Kevin, did you have anything we haven't talked about yet? We kind of ran through our topic list for today.
I think we're good. I just had a total blast at Oil Well Flats outside of Canyon City. So if you're looking for a fun place to hike that tends to have a little less snow than the Springs area, that's a great place to go to. And there's dozens of trails that link together, so you can kind of make your own loop. The loop that I like to do is about a 12-mile loop or so, but you can do a smaller one. There's an area called Island in the Sky that is beautiful. And in the last 2 years, it's become one of my favorite spots to a hike in. And it's, I want to say from where I live, close to downtown, it's only about an hour drive, so it's not terrible. But yeah, if you get a chance, check out the Oil Well Flats area, and that is just northwest of Canyon City.
I've been down there before, and I've written about some of the trails down there in the Canyon City area. There's a lot of good hiking trails. I've hiked in Oil Well Flats myself. I think maybe this coming summer, Kevin, you and I should go down there, and then we could do a podcast about it and talk about the experience we have, and then it would be good topic matter for my column. Because I know in the spring, summer, fall, people really like watching the column for actual trails to go on.
Yeah.
And we do some stuff there. So looking forward to that, and definitely want to explore that a little bit. That a lot is a lot of Bureau of Land Management land, if I remember correctly. So another federal agency managing that. But it's a pretty cool spot, and a lot of cycling. I think they have a lot of cycling trails down there, so they allow some of that, some motorized. So they try to hit all the recreation groups
And there's
down
a
there.
lot of cows there for some reason. So you're on the trail and you see a bunch of cows
Yeah.
just on the trail, and it's like, oh, okay, hello.
Well, that's one of the things Bureau of Land Management does. They do allow open ranching for a fee to ranchers in the area. They allow them to use the federal lands. So it's part of their land management thing. So they do that. So you just got to be careful.
Yeah.
Okay, Kevin. Well, I think we've got everything covered. We'll talk to you next time.
And we'll talk to you later.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Before you go, did you know you can rate and review our Studio 809 podcasts? That will help us because our egos really need to have thousands and thousands of listeners. But that helps our wonderful sponsors reach more ears too. And we do love our sponsors. So just go to Studio 809 or any individual 809 podcast in your iTunes or podcast app and click on ratings and reviews. Thanks.